Hi, it's Chris with Implied Music. Lab's free instruments from Spitfire are a great collection of useful tools. They're sample playback instruments and they're free. I recommend them to all my students. But on the face of it, they may be lacking some controls. It's a very plain looking interface and it doesn't look like you can do much with it. They've got a new library out now, which is a combination of the Yamaha synthesizer, the CS80, a great analog sound, along with their aperture approach to programming. In this case, sending individual sounds to a bank of small cassette players, gradually starting small and bigger. Well, it's a great idea, but listen, this lack of control can feel a little limiting. However, there's a bunch of things we can do. This is a long introduction to a fairly short video. Let's take a look at some of the ideas that I have. Well, I own Aperture, which is kind of a bigger version of this idea. But the great thing about Aperture, and let's just open up one of these right now, is this slider here. Because if I play a simple chord and move this slider, I'm going from a single version, a single iteration of the sound to a very broad and diffused version of it as more and more cassette players, in this case, come into play. You can hear this is a pretty static sound, however, and there aren't a lot of controls on this screen. The big knob is useful, and it gives us some control. For instance, over here, we have a low pass filter. And, you know, that's fun. Let's open it up. We'll have a much brighter sound. And I could easily control click on this knob to assign MIDI continuous controller information to it. Either create automation curves in my DAW or use a slider to move it around. And I think, honestly, that's the intention of the original designers. However, every synthesizer, most good synthesizers, have LFO, low frequency oscillator, control over a bunch of parameters. Now, I just want to give you a quick reminder of what that's like. Let's look at this ES2 in Logic. So in this particular synthesizer, the LFOs, LFO 1 and 2, are mapped to control a couple of different things. LFO 2 mapped to control pitch, and LFO 1, you can see it right here, is mapped to control cutoff. Now, right now, LFO 1 is just running freely. Here we go. As the LFO wave goes up and down, the filter opens and closes. It's a nice effect. And I'm just holding a note and getting this sound. If I push the mod wheel up, pitch will begin to be affected. All live performers like to have live hands-on control of things, but a lot of electronic music producers like to have sounds animate by themselves. Well, let's go back to this Labs instrument, and I want to show you a couple of things that I've done in Logic. I've added 2 MIDI modulators. I'm going to open them both up, and they're doing different things. And what they're doing is mapping their LFO output to controls over there on Spitfire Audio's playback engine. And you can see that now I've got this slider, which was controlling how the aperture sound field opens and closes. It's being animated forward and back. And the same thing is happening with the low pass filter. So these particular controllers just get dropped into place in our MIDI effects channel strip location, and then I control them over here. I've set sine waves. I've set how fast it's going to happen, 3 bars. I've set the output level, and you can actually see it tracking here. All I have to do is tell it which continuous controller I want it to send to. And it could be one of the ones that are just perfectly normal, like mod wheel or portamento time, or ones that, you can assign randomly for yourself. There are 128 of them, and then there's some unregistered ones as well. Over here, this LFO is just going to mod wheel, and mod wheel is the thing that's just normally set to control that slider. Well, now if I play that same chord, I get a continuously evolving, beautiful texture. And I can perform notes with both hands. And honestly, like if I'm just holding down these 6 notes, this is a beautiful sort of low-sill-esque chord texture, right? Six, 7 notes, just diatonic saturation in this case. And the animation of both the aperture and the filter creates an evolving sound field, which is very satisfying to our ears. Can you hear how great that CS80 synth sounds through the aperture? I'm really loving this. Now, we could do this with any of Lab's instruments. Here's our modulators for a different patch. Cassette deck is this patch, and there are a few. You can see there's not that many patches in the CS80, or what they call the cassette synth. And we'll listen to a few of them. So here you can see my aperture is opening and closing really, really quickly. It's a whole different world now. We actually feel a pulse. That's an exciting sound. Opening and closing the aperture is a very effective technique. Here you can see the slow moving filter, and I've set the offset so that it's just tweaking the highs. And here you can see the rather fast moving mod wheel of the aperture. Now I could send it to volume and I get a very strong effect. Here we go. Very strong effect. Let's listen to a couple others. Here's my setup for flat battery. And I've used differing shapes for the LFOs. You can see by adjusting the symmetry control here, I can change how the waveform of the LFO plays out. Here, kind of a quicker rise and a slower release. Over here, this LFO, which is controlling, I think in this case, the filter, is up and down really quickly. So we're going to have a more of a pulse as well. This is great. I've set the rate of this LFO to half notes, and this is creating a nice little beat for me. Again, very animated. And as the aperture opens and closes, as I get a thicker sound and a thinner sound, it's quite satisfying. The CS80 synth, the Yamaha CS80 synth, is a kind of a old-fashioned synth, an analog synth. I associate it with that Vangelis sound, that Blade Runner sound. It is fantastic for pads, and I think that's kind of like where I think it's sort of its highest and best use. These are poly chords, just a little modal saturation, a stack of 2 major chords a whole step apart gives me this lovely effect. Let's open the filter a little bit more. Right here, the filter's output level is kind of slow, and I'm going to set the offset a little bit higher. We'll get brighter and brighter and brighter. You can see the trace of how this pulse is working. I could automate this if I'd like. I don't think I have any right to complain about any free instruments, especially ones of the high quality that we get with the Labs instruments. But one could wish for a couple more controls. For instance, looking at the big knob here, there is no ADSR control. There's no attack, decay, sustain, and release control. Any synth, in my opinion, should have some ADSR control, and I'd love to be able to modulate that as well, or at least just tighten things down a little bit, right? My goodness. Well, I hope this has been useful. Like and subscribe, ding the bell. You'll be notified when I do my videos. I'll see you next time.